So good afternoon, everyone, and in some cases, good morning. I'd like to welcome you all here today to our webinar titled Global Payroll, the Hybrid Model Explained. So it's going to be a very interesting webinar today, and we have huge numbers joining us. Today's webinar will be led by Mary Holland, who's our Chief Customer Officer here at Payslip. And we are thrilled to be joined by one of our great clients, Wave, Travis Saville here, who leads the global payroll strategy at Wave, who's been a client with us now for 3 to 4 years. We were just chatting about it there, since really kind of the early days for both Wave really and Payslip. So it's great to have Travis on board with us again today. So the payroll team at Wave have embraced the use of technology to manage global payroll operations across all their global entities, and they're really seeing the benefits of the efficiency, vendor management, and using both local in-country partners and various vendors to run their global payroll, and using the technology then to access all that data in terms of reporting, managing all their workflows, automations, integrations, etc. So in a great position to join our chat today. So just before we get started, there's a few small housekeeping points. So the webinar is being recorded. It will be available after to everyone after the event. So you'll all receive an email with the link. All our webinars are also available on demand on our website and our YouTube channel. And we also make all webinars available as podcasts. So you can find us on Spotify and listen to any of this webinar and any of our previous webinars in your own time. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of people on board today, so everyone will be muted except for the panel. We will make time at the end for some Q&A, so if you have any comments or questions, you can use the Q&A section to post that. I'll monitor them as we go along, and we will have a couple of poll questions throughout the webinar. But for the moment, I'll hand you over to Mary to get us started. And Mary, I will just share the screen for you. So you should be all okay. You can see that?
Perfect.
Great.
Okay. So in today's session, we're going to talk about the hybrid model, and we're going to explain how it's going to help you in your global payroll journey.
All right.
So one of the things that we know about the global payroll landscape is that we always need local expertise to understand the employment and taxation requirements in each country. So with a mix of service providers and local vendors, you can build a hybrid model that's going to be efficient for your particular organization. And why is this important? It's important because depending on your organization, you have complex packages that you're providing to employees around the world. It could be stock, it could be benefits, it can be highly comped bonuses that are being done. And the important thing is to make sure that you're servicing the employees in your particular country, that they're being taxed and all of the requirements for employment are being followed. So it does require us to get the local expertise, and how we pull this all together in a model is by selecting the appropriate service providers and local vendors that will support that. So it's important to tie them all together by using technology in the platform. So I know that you've all been told, and we'll be talking a little bit with this about Travis, is that we need a single contract with a single vendor, and that you need a small number of vendors. But really we have to think about is, what does your business actually need to support the organization that you actually have? So what you do need is a global payroll management solution, so that you have the ability to choose the vendors that will support your organization. And so when we look at choosing the vendors, do I have expats that need some support? Do I have people on business traveler? Where are my employees? So how am I going to get that expertise down in Brazil that I need to be able to ensure that my employees are being paid timely and accurately per local law? We all can agree in the global payroll space that there is local payroll regulations that we need to follow. Each country is unique in itself. And it's very, very important for our organizations to make sure that we're doing that correctly and accurately, because we don't want to be a poster child on one of the social media platforms that let everybody know that we didn't withhold employment or social taxes correctly. We also do know that we have to automate our processes and look at validations to make sure that we're automating and using integration across the board in our organizations when we're looking at a solution. And then, of course, standardization is always key. Standardization is the driving factor to make sure that we understand what's happening across the world. And so the standardization will provide us visibility across the board in what's actually happening and the ability to control our expenses. So looking at having your standardization of your elements is extremely important because, for example, let's say we have different bonuses across the world, but we have different names for them. If we have a subcategory to categorize them to be bonuses, then when we run our global reporting, we can get all of the bonuses across the globe for 60 plus countries we might be operating in. And then we have the ability to bring that to one exchange rate, which is going to be key to be able to provide the visibility and controlling the expenses that our organization is looking to for us to support. You can go to the next slide, Eva. So what's out there when we look at payroll services? So of course, we know with large or a large footprint in organizations, you may be doing it in-house. It could be done on in-house software with, for example, SAP or SuccessFactors. So you're using their software engine to do payroll processing. You can use an outsourcer or a BPO model where you're working with a company that's you're going to be assigned a specialist to do the processing for you. One of the probably main common vendors out there for a long period of time that started in the 90s was the aggregator model. And so the aggregator model's been probably with us for the last 15 years or so. And that was kind of the model that everybody was looking at for global payroll management. But what we're finding is that the aggregator model doesn't particularly provide sometimes the flexibility or the service that you might need for a particular country. So you may use an aggregator with some of your locations across the world, where others you might pick a BPO or outsource it, or maybe even have some in-house if you have a large population. Let's say, for example, you have 2,000 employees in Brazil. You may be looking for a software that you're running that operation in. We also know that we need to have some technology to manage it. So to be able to be successful in the global payroll and to control visibility in our expenses and the reporting that's needed, we need a technology to be able to help us so that we have visibility and control over our processes. We know what the workflow is, and we know that our employees are being paid timely and accurately, and that we can do validations and automation against that technology platform. And then we also might be doing using local payroll providers. That could be an accounting firm that can support the operation. So often, sometimes when you enter a new country that you may not be familiar with, a good solution may be to work with a local accounting firm so that they can get you set up with all of the requirements and making sure that you understand the requirements and the reporting pieces of this. And in some countries, you may need to give reporting information for payroll to your finance team who is working with a local accounting firm. So that might be a model that works for you if your populations are smaller. So kind of having a blend of all of them. So the answer is, probably the best is the answer to 4 to 5 plus selected you can have, but ideally using one of 3 of the above. So I would probably say that in best practices, large companies will use an in-house model. Then they'll use a new payroll provider from an accounting firm for some of the small brand new operations. And then they'll look for local providers that are going to provide the service and support that you need. And it is possible that you can use a BPO model or outsource it to a group that does handle a particular region. So looking at what's best for your particular organization. We can move to the next slide.
I'm on mute. I might just launch a poll now because
okay.
The first poll is just relevant to that particular slide. So how do you currently manage your multi-country payroll? So it'd be good to get an idea here of the audience and if we're using in-house, BPO, aggregator, or the mix of the local in-country providers. So I'll give that a couple of seconds now to.
So Travis, what do you think the attendees will be selecting today?
I'll be curious. I think BPO outsource, mainly because I think that has always been a really like from the sales position. But I could imagine we could see a good deal of in-house too.
Yeah, I think we've seen that people are looking for a model that's going to work. So depending on how it's presented in the combination, we might have that. And then of course, in-house provides the ability for someone to control it, the situation, especially when they have large employee populations. But I do think that the local and the accounting firms are becoming a lot more popular because we can tie it through with technology. And I know we've been kind of for many, many years, the aggregator was the solution, the model that was going to tie it together. But we're finding there's different pieces to, depending on who you're working with and what countries you are. Sometimes the aggregator model will work for you, but you really need some expertise. And, for example, in Africa, where Wave does a great deal of business, that you have that local support and you have software that can take care of the situation. So Aoife, what does the poll results give us?
You should be able to see the results there. So we have the highest amount are actually using a mix of local and country partners, which is great to see that. So we have 58%. So it's good to see that piece. And I think, as you were saying, Mary, the importance of compliance really as well when you're using that local provider and ensuring that you're always compliant with local legislation. And then next after that is the BPO outsource at 17%, 14% in-house and 11% aggregators. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. So apologies now. I'll move on to the next slide.
Okay. So we're going to move forward what is a hybrid model for global payroll? So it's using 2 or 3 of the different models or services that we just talked about. You may use a accounting firm, and you might use in-house software, or you might use local. So looking at what is going to best suit your particular organization. So it's really best, it works if you have 10 plus countries across the world. Thinking about when you have 80 plus, what are you going to do and how are you going to break it down to what's going to best meet your needs in your organization. So we're looking at having the ability to manage it and get the efficiency that we need with having local expertise and support and making sure that it's accurate so that we're meeting the employee needs. The important thing is people come to work to receive their pay accurately and timely, and that's what they expect. And they expect it to be delivered through the compliance piece of that. So what it might look like is some countries you might use the Big Four, some you might have a local country ICP, or in the region in Asia, a lot of people, you might use a vendor that's out there in Asia called Tricor, where they focus in Japan and the Asia regions, and that's where their expertise is. So what we look at, that's the sweet spot, and that's the area they're paying attention to. So looking for those type of providers that best suits the needs in your organization. And so it's really important that whatever vendor or provider service that we use, we're doing an evaluation of what we need in our services. But we want to be able to think about always managing it globally and using a technology solution so we can tie it all together. So that's the piece that kind of makes the world go round in global payroll today, is having the technology solution that's going to give us the visibility and the reporting needs we have. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. So when we look at the market view, so Gartner is, many of you may be familiar with Gartner. Gartner follows the HR and payroll services space. And so Gartner has, first of all, the quote at the very bottom says, kind of says it all. There's no truly global payroll service solution due to the complexity of regulation requirements. I think all of us can agree to that particular statement. So Gartner actually positioned Payslip as a recognized leader for global payroll automation and integration in both 2019 and 2020, and in the global payroll technology category. And so that is pretty good to be able to have that recognition, for Payslip to have that recognition. But it's also, I think it's more of a recognition that Gartner is looking across the organizations and recognizing that payroll is complex, and because of its complex nature, that we need to have a technology solution to tie it all together to manage the complexity of what we're offering. So we can move to the next slide. And so also, when we look at the space on analysts, Nelson Hall is another analyst that follows the space very closely. And so both Gartner and Nelson Hall provide us good insight to what's really actually going on in the market space. So if you have an opportunity to look at any of their reports, please look at that, because they're looking across the organization or across the world and what's really actually happening. And so Liz at Nelson Hall is one of the analysts that follows the HR and payroll space. And in her piece is long-term success in payroll services space will require a modern platform based on using technology and services with a flexible service delivery that can meet the needs of the changing business environment. So that's really exactly where we are today, is that we really do need to have a modern technology platform that gives us the ability to be flexible and to be able to adjust as needed. And if we think about just adjust as needed, if we have a service provider that is not working for us, how quickly can we adjust and move to a new service provider so that we can correct the situation we might have and not lose our past information and still have that ability to retain that information on a technology platform. So having the ability to be flexible and to adjust as business needs is extremely important as we move forward. We can go to the next slide. So when we look at service providers and looking at your organization, so this is really kind of homework questions to look at. And if you haven't done this, I would encourage you next week to take a look at this, and we can give you this slide. Aoife would be happy to send this slide out for you to think about, is looking at, have you really mapped it out and done, documented really what's happening? What are the number of countries, the regions, the entities, what's really actually going on that you're responsible to manage for? And of course that does, we do need to know how many employees are there. What type of workers you have in today's world is something that's going to be extremely important as we look at the importance of having to track remote workers, the expats, or different type of workers that are coming in. Maybe it's fixed-termed employees that are there. And really looking at, are you satisfied today with your current vendors? And when I look at it, it can be as simple as just using the traffic light system and rating your vendors by green, amber, and red, and identifying those ones that you are not happy with, and kind of thinking about what you don't like about a particular provider and what you need. If I think we missed, we have to go to the next slide. There we go. Okay. And then when I look at that too, is what automation do you have today with your providers? What's happening today? Is it manual, or are we kind of, as we say, stuck in Excel hell, or we're just doing copy paste from one file to another file? So we're using what I would just call the Excel, our friendly Excel that we all love in the payroll space, but we're just copying and pasting into different templates. That's not productive, and it's really not something that there's room for error. There's also room for people not having a strategic position or feeling really good about what they're actually doing and using our talent and our resources and our organization to the max. So looking at that, looking at how much we're integrating between benefits and our HCM system, I always like to focus on what is in our HCM system. Can we get that information as much as we can for global payroll in our HCM and get integration to bring it over? What's happening with our GL files and those items? Are we able to run a general ledger file from our payroll system and then automatically just get it over to the finance system without having someone have to touch that file? Same thing goes with our benefit or pension providers. What's going on? Do we have that ability to bring those things in? And what is the amount of work? And when I say the amount of work, it's is it manual? How many hours are being spent? So just doing some research on that. Do you have, like, how are you measuring what's due and not due? Is there a dashboard or workflow or calendar that you have visibility to see what's happening? I have 60 countries around the world. You know, do I have something at my fingertips to be able to find out exactly where that payroll is with a dashboard? Is somebody getting an alert that something's not being done? Do we have that ability today? And then, you know, the number one thing around the world is data security. No matter where you are, is like, we have the most important information about people in our payroll, and we need to make sure that that's extremely secure and we're following all of the requirements for data security. So how is that being managed? And do you have any concerns about the way your information is being transferred today? And even in today's world, we sometimes still hear that people are transferring information via email, which we all know that that is not a secure exchange of information. And then our favorite compliance needs. What do you need in compliance? You know, there's many things that have to happen in compliance. You know, new hires reporting, you know, termination reporting, information on pensions. It's all across the board. Are we meeting those needs in our organization? And then looking at your reporting. So this is one thing that I would really have you spend on your wish list. What is happening today in reporting? What are you doing in reporting? Are you consolidating with our friendly Excels, you know, multiple information so that you have everything pulled into an Excel file? Can you run a report with different currencies? How does that look, and how much time are you spending on that? So thinking about these as we look and choose our vendors, and we look and choose how we're going to manage the space, we need to be able to answer these questions, because these are questions that are going to come up when we're talking to senior management about the expense of changing, or what our model is going to be. We can go to the next slide, Aoife. So we have to think about what's our plan. So we talked about the different service models. So the last slide we went over is analyzing what you have and identifying what you need, and looking at what we need based on the mix of countries, population, services, and support that we need in our particular organization. So always still thinking about, we have to remember that payroll is always local, but we need to make sure that we have the ability with a technology solution so that we can have the visibility and the workflow and the reporting at the global level. And that includes the pieces of having the automation, the standardization, the validations that all come into the platform, so that we're recognizing that we have everything at the global level, thinking global, but having the ability to bring it right down to that local level. And it could be local level to maybe Travis in the US, understanding exactly what his expenses are for him or for his organization that is being supported. So having that ability is really extremely important in a global space.
Great. So I might just quickly go into a poll there on that, give you a bit of a break, Mary.
Okay.
So on global payroll management planning, do you currently have a global payroll management plan in place? So real quick, easy answers, yes, no, or it's on the roadmap for 2023.
So Travis, what do you think is going to be the answer to this question?
I'm going to hope for yes, where it's on the roadmap. Hopefully no nos. We'll see.
I would think, as if we look through the journey of probably the last 3, 4, 5 years, people are definitely looking for that to be on their roadmap. I think they've recognized it as we expanded. I think COVID helped us really kind of identify, especially, you know, what's happening around the world, and you had to make adjustments for different offices that needed support and help, and how we all pulled it together with the visibility of not being in, you know, set office or set structure. So I think we've had a lot with that.
Definitely a good catalyst.
Yeah, I think it kind of changed the outlook on technology a little bit too. Technology and automation in many pieces, and if you even look at the whole image of where people work has changed that model. So Aoife, what are the results?
Yeah, we're just sharing the results now. So we have 46% of people have no, and then we've got 31% yes, and then 23% on the roadmap.
Okay. So, I mean, if we look at it, we have, over half is moving towards the right direction of where we want to be. So that's where the technology.
These slides will help the ones that are still in the no phase.
Well, the slides will help the people that are in the no phase. Also, just bringing up the thought about the company may not want to do it now because they're watching expenses. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'll say with that doesn't stop us from doing our research and looking at what the best solution is. And then on the list of the questions and things that we actually need, taking a look at it from that angle too. So when we're looking at a global payroll management solution, we're looking at a technology platform that we can automate the flows of information coming into the system and also back out of the system. So looking at that, looking at standardizing the information that comes back from the ICP. And when I say standardizing it, we're not going to ask the ICP to change what they're providing to us. We're going to classify the elements in what we actually need. So we'll classify them in English, classify them in local language, put them to a subcategory that's going to be beneficial to us. So I may have a lot of expats that are in my organization, and I want to track all of the different compensation components. And so I may put a subcategory expat expense, and so, or expat, benefits, any of that subcategory that would work. And then when I run a report, I can get a report of all the expenses that I'm classifying or those benefits that I'm paying out to the expats. And often, believe it or not, sometimes when people don't think about it, but it's almost 2 or 3 times their annual salary. So that's an expense to the organization that somebody needs to plan for. We also want to provide, as we talked about, is having the ability to choose whatever provider you want to meet your service needs. So really looking at that, having the ability, if something's not working for you, to be able to change to a new vendor without losing all of your information that's been stored in your technology platform and not losing any of that reporting ability, having that at your fingertips if you get audited, even if you switch vendors. So thinking about that. And looking at all those data flows, so thinking about everything that comes in and we send out and all of the reporting that we have to do for payroll. And there's many. We have, our finance team wants information, our financial analysts want, projections on expenses. We have our benefits and pension providers that need information. So all of that information needs to be automated and have the ability to flow out. And we have documenting exactly what has happening. And looking at, what are we doing manually? And can we figure out a way to get that in through an automation and a validation so that we don't have to do work? Measuring the performance of our service providers is going to be key to make sure that if we've contracted for them to do X and are they delivering the payroll on time, what type of errors are happening? How many times do we have to send that payroll back with corrections and what type of corrections are happening? So being able to measure your inputs versus your outputs from the your payroll provider to making sure that they're what you gave them to process is what you actually get, and making sure that you have, it just brings it back to having good audit control. And when finance or outside internal audits want to have the audits, you have that at your fingertips to provide. And then, of course, you have the ability to choose what's best for you. So having that visibility and control over what's happening to the process. You assign the correct provider, you get to assign the correct workers in the organization, you know who has access to the system. And so you're able to streamline and look at everything at the fingertips by having a good dashboard and visibility of what's happening inside the platform and what's happening in my 60+ countries around the world. Okay, Eve, we'll go to the next question. So with a global control platform, the important thing is we're unifying our processes. So a single way of working across countries. So we're unifying that process. we take the approach to do a global first model. And why we say global first, we want to standardize it at the global level so that we can bring it down to the local level. So the important thing as we look through the global first model is we're thinking globally, what do we actually need, and what are elements, classifications, and pieces that we need in our organization. But we recognize local is important. We want to look at automating all of the processes that we have and looking at manual work and thinking about what do we have today and what can we do now to get that automation in place. And then we want to make sure that we have connectors of our integrations with our HCMs, our local vendors, and our finance system. So making sure that we have that streamlined integration for information coming in and delivering back out to what actually is needed. So do we have, are we putting back our payroll results into our HCM system so our managers know exactly how much is being spent in a particular location for a particular sales department? And so, of course, we need that global control system platform. So a platform that helps us to manage all of these pieces together, all in one place, so that you as global owners will have the tools and information at your fingertips to be able to support the business and help move forward and determine strategic goals. So we're going to talk with Travis. So really, Travis came to Payslip kind of in 2020, right? In the midst of the last part of 2020 when we were all focusing on COVID in many pieces. And he definitely had a major request to be able to onboard 7 new countries immediately. He'll talk in a few minutes, is that his choice was to use local payroll providers, but he saw his vision to be able to have a global payroll control platform because he knew he was going to have growth and had recognized the ability that he needed standardized processes and wanted to automate different things and to make it scalable so that as Wave grew and moved forward, that he would have the ability to support the business. So we're going to talk right now. I have some questions for Travis, and he can share a little bit more about his journey with Payslip and also his journey in automation and the choice of using technology. So Travis, let's hear about your role and how you support Wave with global payroll operations management. And currently, how many global locations do you have and where are they located? And what services does Wave provide to your clients?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. So I am Wave's director of HR systems, which is in charge of all of our HR systems that scale with our business, namely payroll delivery is one of the biggest things that I work on. I'm mainly in charge of like the big overview, managing our providers, our overall delivery, and recruiting would kill me if I didn't manage to stay growing our team. We are hiring. But I will say in, the last 6 months, I think the most important part of my job now is kind of being the chief storyteller for our payroll team. I think, often it's easy to see payroll as, 1 to 2 days a month. And the reality is, the orchestration of payroll is the kind of this ongoing thing. And so I really enjoy getting to talk about kind of the work that our payroll teams do day in and day out. To the number of payrolls or processing or geographies, I want to say it's close to 20. With a little bit of humor, I think I've forgotten the exact number, and I guess that's something Payslip has allowed me to do. But I think with France, we're at 20 now. Feel free to correct me. And, a little bit about Wave. So we employ heavily in our operating countries, which are primarily in the West African Monetary Union, or WIMU. And then we have small pockets of talented product engineering and G&A folks globally scattered across Europe and North America. And then a little bit about, who is Wave? What is Wave? What are we doing? So simply, Wave is on a mission to make Africa the first cashless continent. We do this by building kind of a modern financial network that brings life-changing financial infrastructure to the continent. And most importantly, we build a product and provide financial services that our users just love. And that's what we're doing.
Well, Travis, first of all, to me, it's very interesting, Wave's mission and where you're doing the work, because Africa is as if we look across the globe and you ask payroll professionals around the world, and most people aren't in Africa, there is some growth and some movement into Africa. And then just the mission of what your company has to do, which we know has a huge compliance piece to it, right? So as we as we look at and think about the payroll space, we know that the providers and who you work with is going to be extremely important because it's really high profile. And I'm sure that there's a lot of audits and review that's actually happening in that particular space. So as I kind of shared already that, you decided to make or look for payroll services kind of when everybody else was trying to keep the lights on in their organization as we were in 2020 and people were working at home and trying to figure out how we all link everything together and still keep all of the requirements that we have to do for payroll. So things have drastically changed. We were talking about that before the webinar, that COVID did provide some exposure to things that we can do differently and the needs that we need for our organization. Please share some of your thoughts and strategic decisions of why you believed a technology solution was ideal for WAVE, especially as you started with very small populations with Payslip. And we were happy to talk to you, but we had no idea what was going to happen with WAVE. And your company was moving forward after your Senegal WAVE was established from your executive staff. You were making a change, kind of company structure change. So want to share what the thoughts were on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I think in keeping with, WAVE's values of, constant iteration and learning, we learned a lot from our time in setting up payrolls and delivering on payroll with SendWave. I think we tried every model of payroll delivery in some form or another that you mentioned. So when we entered into the agreement to sell SendWave to WorldRemit, our executive team and my boss, our chief people officer, kindly gave me kind of a blank canvas to work with. And thankfully, WAVE has never feared being a bit unconventional or taking informed risks. So this made, selling kind of my vision a bit easier. I think, when I go back and think about what I attempted to solve for, or, what were my keys when redesigning WAVE's payroll delivery, I think the most important thing was like, it needs to meet our needs today. Like we have to be able to deliver payroll in 7 countries, following the close of the sale. And most importantly, could scale as we grew. Like I knew we were going to grow after we exited from our SendWave business. And so it was, vitally important that this was a scalable technology. As I mentioned, building a team, something that I could onboard a payroll delivery team to quickly. As we grew, I think you saw it just became, hey, we have another key user coming on. I would say technology has been really helpful in, bringing new people into our payroll delivery team and having them work through the similar processes, irregardless of the country they're processing for. You noted on our kind of reporting and auditing requirements. So I definitely wanted something that could support that, that didn't require as much manual intervention with, various Excel sheets. And then last, and probably maybe the most important for WAVE, was an experience that our employees just love. Like one of the things I think, we've talked about and I constantly go on about is how payroll delivery at WAVE feels a bit magical and that it just works. And it's a really refreshing employee experience to deliver on a payday that just happens.
Now, I would definitely say, Travis, one of the things as you started your journey is that you found payroll people that supported the project, right? So they had the initiative of the company and work towards, even though you had a small population at the beginning, how can we look at our processes, how we can make changes to things as we grow. And you're exactly right as you talk about it just being, it just happening, but it's happened because you've done the work to pick a technology solution and then set up the standardization and your reporting ability to have everything in place. And really, if we think about it, at the end of the day, going through those audits and digging through paperwork, if it's at your fingertips for that particular payroll or particular year, it makes everybody's life a lot easier. And we do know compliance continues to be our friend around the world, and our friendly tax agencies need to look at those things, because they too have to make sure everyone's compliant as we go through that. So I would agree. You definitely, when you came to Payslip, you were very small, and we had no idea what was actually in store for us. But we onboarded you very, very fast that first month, because you had that business need, and worked through that process. And I've seen the growth of your team, and also kind of evaluating what's the best model for their your organization as we've gone through the last 3 years. So on your growth journey, so I'll ask the next question. From 2020 to present, you've had, Wave has had growth and expansion. But one of the other things that's happened, and we've talked about this, Travis, is, Wave was smart to start thinking about 6 months ago of what's actually happening around the world with inflation and the cost of the things. So over the last 2 years, when we're going through that, you had to make decisions about your hybrid model, what's best for technology and how you can support the business. What are some of the things that you looked at to support the business and help them with that decision as we looked at where should we be in the world today with many things happening?
Yeah, a great question. I think, initially, early on, our focus was really on, what is the value we're getting from our outsourced providers or ICPs? Like, are they helping us stay compliant? Do we feel informed? Do we know what we, otherwise wouldn't know processing in countries? And then I think more recently, in the last 6 months, as we've been able to build that team, especially in our operating countries, we kind of always knew on the back end there was an ability for us to save some money by bringing this processing back in-house, but not yet having kind of the bench strength on the team. But now that we had developed that bench strength, we knew we could save a material amount of money by bringing the processing for those larger groups of employees in-house. And thankfully, we now have the bench strength to kind of meet that need. And so we were able to kind of, I would say, in the last 6 months, quickly pivot for our largest employee populations and adapt Payslip to delivering payroll in-house. And it kind of happened, again, I don't want to harken on the seamless bit, there's lots of work that happens behind the scenes, but for our employees, it really just felt like a continuation of payroll, which was, a win in my book. And I'm very thankful to our very talented teams in delivering that.
Well, I think you definitely saw the advantages of the hybrid model, right? Making that decision that as we start out, you were small, you had service providers, you needed to make a change, but eventually you had the platform and the technology there to make that change. And as you made that change to support the business, you were able to, for two things, you had control of what you wanted to process with by going in-house. And then you had also the ability to monitor your cost. So that's one of the things with the hybrid model. At the end of the day, we all know global payroll, to do it correctly, does cost money, right? But we need to make sure we're managing our expenses across who we're selecting to do our service for. And then if the service we are asking for, we need to make sure they're delivered so that we can monitor what they're delivering for us and making sure that we're meeting the needs of our organization. And so I will say, having observed from the outside of what's happening from my team reporting back, you were able very seamlessly to get that transition happening, because you already had set up your standardization, your workflow of your model of what actually happened. And the team were on board and knew what the steps were for the processing. And so it was just switching to a new provider and not really changing the operation of what's actually happening. You still had your reporting and all your ability to all of your past records, which is always in any organization as we make a change between providers, is don't ever forget not to keep those records, because you never know when the auditors will be there. And it's happened to many people around the world. You just thought they were going to be saved by the payroll service, but they didn't retain them for as long as you thought that happened. So let's talk for a few minutes on your thoughts about the aggregator model. So we talked about different hybrids, but the aggregator model, as we talked about, it was the preferred model for many, many organizations as we started in the 90s. It was the push that everybody was looking for to solve global payroll, right? It's a challenge when no matter where you sit around the world, when somebody now says you're responsible for global payroll, and now you say, what am I going to do and how am I going to get services there? But I think over the last 20 plus years, the models changed and the services have changed with the aggregator model. So what some of your thoughts on that and some of the challenges that you see that you had when you were looking out for a new model, that you were looking to actually not use an aggregator model? Because in your particular situation, when you started out, you were rather small. So it would have pretty typically fit to just say, okay, an aggregator model will take care of that. I'm in 7 countries. I can go to one provider. I have one contract. And of course, as we talked about, sometimes we're getting that solution. Here's the magic that's going to happen. But you thought about it and had strategic view and vision. So I think it's helpful for organizations to understand, it is a model that's there. It's not going to probably go away right away, but what do we need now and then into the future as we go future thinking?
Yeah, well, I certainly have some thoughts here on this one. I think, as you noted, for the smaller populations or smaller spread of countries, like it can seem like a no-brainer. Often when you get those sales calls, it's that similar pitch, like, we'll take care of all of these payroll headaches for you, deliver a perfect payroll. You don't have to worry about the details. There's just a small premium attached, but all of your payroll woes are gone. And I've often found, why there is an element of that is true. Like, in addition to that premium, you're losing out on the visibility and control that you would have and how you deliver payroll to your organization. And so, yes, while, you can deliver a near perfect payroll, you kind of remain in this reactionary mode with your employees. As it relates to payroll, oh, your net check is different. You're not sure why. You don't have the visibility. You now have to go to the aggregator. And that can really, I think, in time erode trust with your organization. Me as an employee, if my check's not right and, payroll can't speak to it, like, it's concerning. And Mary, I think you have experienced and alluded, like, Wave has a very open and transparent culture. Most of our Slack channels are open and people join them freely. And I think, we just had a really refreshing experience in our Berlin channel at the start of the year where one of our employees is just asking his colleagues, it's like, hey, I noticed my net check is different. Does anyone know why this is, happening? And our payroll team, the person who was responsible for processing that had seen that during the preview and had gotten that insight and was able to proactively jump in there and say, yes, we saw this during our preview and we've confirmed that it's the upward adjustment and the social insurances for the new tax year. Like, if you have any questions, like, don't hesitate to reach out. And, right there, they were able to address that employee's concern, but also for that entire population in that channel to reassure them that, like, payroll, is watching this very closely. And we take a look at those variances from month to month. And so I think the part there that I would say is I do think organizations value and benefit from having competent and informed payroll team members who can speak to what's happening, month to month. And so when I think about the aggregator model, I think that's one area where you have to concede that you're just kind of sending out that output and sending out that input and waiting for that output. And I think this is really kind of where a hybrid approach can shine. We have markets in which we have developed teams that are subject matter experts in processing payroll. For us, that's namely Senegal, Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, but then we also have our smaller European markets where we rely on those local ICPs to keep us up to date. And we're able to do that in a, manner that is not reactionary, but instead is proactive. And I think that is something that, really empowers my payroll team to speak confidently to what's happening month to month. And I definitely, I'm thinking, you mentioned those early kind of discovery calls with Fidelma. the one thing that I wanted, and I still to this day want, is the sense of payroll that just works. And I really do believe like the hybrid model has empowered us to deliver on that experience.
No, I think, well, first of all, we always have to think about the employee experience, which is 100% key, but giving your team the ability for them to be able to answer and to see the reporting and the reasons and the visibility of what's happening. So when these questions come up, they already know because the validations and the automations and the review of the information's been done. And it's not manual going through Excel files after Excel files. Everything's at the fingertips to be able to support the business. And I think they, as employees, are empowered to support and provide information. And I think that's even key as we build out the global payroll footprint as we move forward, is empowering people in our organization to support the business. So before we take questions, I have one last question for you is, what advice would you provide to payroll professionals on looking at the hybrid model strategically and selling the solution to management? You've kind of shared on that, but I don't know if you had any closing pieces that you wanted to provide before we take some questions from the attendees today.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, think about or start with like what your end state is. What do you want payroll delivery to feel like at your organization? And does this align with, what your company wants to deliver to its employees? And I would say build your case around that. I think it's an easier sell. Now we can't forget building those stakeholders with finance, treasury, our audit teams, making sure that we, bring in those value adds, on demand or automated GL creation, simplified treasury reporting, being audit ready all the time. But I do think payroll and payroll teams in general often have a tendency to kind of dismiss their ability to impact or their ability to influence businesses, which simply just isn't the case. I think as we employ in a more global context, like payrollers and especially global payrollers are an incredibly important part of that decision. I have found the group to be professionals with an unmatched bar of integrity, and we take an immense amount of pride in delivering payroll each and every month. And so we should feel empowered to speak to the experiences that we can deliver with the right tools, the right providers, and the right technologies.
Well, you're definitely right, Travis. Payroll is the center of the universe in any organization, and all paths go there. But it definitely does provide, payroll professionals should be empowered, and we provide the strategic ability when we have technology and the automation and validation to support the business, and that feels great for all of the team members that are supporting that. So, Aoife, we have some questions in our queue.
Yeah, we have quite a lot. So we have one about reporting. So can you talk a little bit as to an organization can have combined reporting for all countries when you have a mix of different vendors, so aggregators, local ICPs, accounting firms?
I can talk about that, how we do it at Wave, or Mary.
Okay. No, why don't you just talk about how you can do it at Wave, and then I can pop back in with a few other pointers, or how we do it, how we help you at Payslip to achieve that goal.
Yeah, so I think, for us with Payslip, it empowers us, as we're setting up a country, we go in and say like, okay, what pay elements and deductions are we expecting? And then we have our internal playbook of, mainly guidance with accounting of how do we want to treat these in our books? And so, why earnings may be broken down between like a basic salary and then, additional parts of that, or vacation, 13, 14 month. Like we know at Wave, we want to have that all fall into our basic salary. So we have a subcategory, which is salary or base pay elements. And then, we also have an additional for variable bonus. And we do that across all of those earning codes, or earning and deduction codes in all of our markets. But the nice part is that we've categorized it in a way that with the power of Payslip, it all comes in to those specific buckets. So we're able to report on it across all of our geographies, looking at an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah, and also I should highlight, at least on Wave, you also were able to look at your finance and the account codes that were being used, so that you can use it standardized across yes. all across Wave, so that often when we look at it, we may have different account codes that are being used, but when we start to look at the standardization, and one of the reports that we actually have is the ability for clients to run a report on all of their elements, the classifications across the globe, and then also the account code, so they can take a look at making sure that's all aligned. Done a lot of work to standardize and get things aligned, but making sure you're keeping it there and seeing what's set up. So that's another thing, is not just setting up a new bonus code because you don't know where it is. You have the ability to look at that. And so Travis kind of put it all together in how what happened with his experience with Wave. But we, during the implementation and the standardization, we work with you to think about global first. What do you need from a global level? As Travis mentioned, they want to call salary, but we know we have different components of that. And it doesn't matter what the ICP brings us back in, because we're going to classify it. We're going to take the ICP's information and classify it into the way we want it set up. So it doesn't matter what local language you have, we'll have the local language and the English and the subcategory to get that reporting that you need. Okay, Aoife, do you want to go to the next question? Whoops.
Sorry, I'm muted. Sorry about that. Just one moment. So there's a follow-up one there. Do you, and this is in follow-up to the question about the reporting. So do you work with all external vendors to bring the data into your solution?
Yes, we do. We work with that. We bring in the gross to net report. It doesn't matter what format it is. We see some wonderful formats, but through our integration and mapping, we map the information from the gross to net report into the element classification. And when that happens, as soon as that report is dropped on our site, we have what we call zero touch, or Zito, which is our automation process that brings that file into the platform. We do validations to make sure we identify if there's how many people are on the file. We identify if there's a new element that isn't there. So we do validations on that report. If everything passes, it automatically goes in the system. Otherwise, you have a validation report that has you walk through what actually has to be corrected with detailed information on how to correct it. Maybe it's a new element that came for a new tax in a particular location, and it's not in our system right now, so you would need to add that, and then the Zito validation will work correctly for that. Doesn't matter, we have horizontal, vertical GTN files that are there. Sometimes there's 2 files for the gross to net, but we're able to map that in through our process, working with you on your element classifications during implementation.
And do you have anything you want to add to that one?
No, that was a perfect way to describe it.
And the last question is, and I don't know if we have time, we have a question just on compliance with, just want a couple of tips on compliance with GDPR.
Our platform is a closed platform, so all the exchange of information that comes in from the platform to the ICP and the ICP pack, or to any place that we're sending the information, we're following GDPR. We're hosted out of Ireland, so we're in our company was headquartered in Ireland, so we're hosted on Amazon server through Ireland is our hub base with that. So we're 100% following that. All of our employees are trained on GDPR training annually and have an exam a quiz to take after that particular piece. We monitor that, and we also have ISO certification for our security on our system. So the thing is, we will ensure that the information is exchanged through an exchange site over to the ICP and the ICP back. There is no emails. If an ICP or somebody sends us information via email by mistake, client or an ICP, we will immediately delete the ICP, delete the email, and let the person that sent them know that this is not the secure way to exchange data. So the employees are 100% compliant on that piece, and we monitor all of the controls around that.
Great. Well, I think we've got, there is still a lot of questions there, but what we'll do is we'll come back offline to each one of those questions. So Mary and Travis will provide answers to those. So thank you very much for all the questions today. And I think we are just at the hour now. So Mary, if you want to have any closing comments, or Travis?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Travis for sharing so that he shared with the attendees today about the hybrid model and the pieces of getting ready for the technology piece. And then no matter what, if it's not right for you to make that decision now because you're watching your expenses for this year, please get yourself ready. So there's no time like now to evaluate where you are, and then start to build your business case and identify the areas that you need support on, because well, you can talk to management and explain that to them so that they're aware of what's actually happening. And they may end up just making the decision to let you move forward, even though you're watching different areas of expenses.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And as I mentioned before, a recording will be available to everyone. You receive an email in the next 24 hours with the link to that, and we'll follow up with those questions directly. Thank you very much, Travis, for joining us today. And thank you very much, Mary. Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
good one. Bye.